Hi everybody, Tracy here with you. So first of all, thank you for understanding about me having to cancel our Zoom meeting on Wednesday night this week. I do apologize, but at the last minute, the dean could not attend an event, and our associate dean is actually out of town. So they asked me to step in and attend on behalf of the College of Business and LSUS. So like I said, I hate to do that to you guys, but it just was one of those things that was unavoidable. Also, I did host today on Saturday a Q&A session for our class. So if you have questions that weren't answered in that Q&A or whatever, I've also responded to everything in the instructor virtual office today. So if you still have any questions, though, it's probably best at this point just to email me or text me directly, and I'll be happy to do that. But tonight what I want to do with you is go over the PowerPoint presentation and talk about some of the things that hopefully are of interest to you guys. So if you'll bear with me just 1 second here, I'd like to share my screen with you. Just move this over real quick. 1 quick second here. Stop. Hey, be nice. Okay, so let me do this share screen for you guys. Sorry, took me a second to get it up. Okay, so we're going to be talking tonight in 8753 specifically about the invisible student. And so I think this is, it's a very interesting sort of topic. And, I think it may be eye-opening, at least in some ways. So here we go. So we all know, particularly when we're talking about urban education, there's a million different reform models out there. Now, the dynamics of those reform models have changed a little bit, obviously due to COVID. You may have seen on the news this week that they're shutting down schools again in New York. A couple of districts here, or parishes, excuse me, in Louisiana have also decided now to move back to virtual formats. So like I said, even though, there was a lot of reform movements happening, unfortunately right now things are just in such a state of change all the time. But remember, there is no single model or no single textbook or program or whatever that's really going to solve all of the problems that we face in urban education. It is a very complex and challenging issue. Now, there are lots of urban schools and districts that are doing exceedingly well with their students, but it took a multi-pronged approach. So just keep in mind, like I said, if somebody says to you, if you'll just do these 5 things, then you're going to be able to reform the school, the students will all achieve at or above grade level. They're probably selling you some swamp plants. So just, understand that is the world we're living in. We also have to understand, before we can truly begin to do better and help our students to succeed, we really need to understand what it is that many urban youth bring to the table. Now, keep in mind, this is not true for every child in every school. But if you look at them as a cohort or as a very large group, these are the things that we tend to see. First of all, they have a very distorted self-image. Some of them see themselves as broken or dirty or undeserving. They don't think that they can achieve. I mean, I've literally had students look at me and say, I can't do this. And I'm like, well, we haven't even tried it yet. And my job as a teacher is to make sure you can do it. So, I'm going to support and help you. Some people believe about our urban youth that they need a savior to give them a better life, which is both insulting and certainly not true. But for many of them, because of the poverty, that they live in, day-to-day existence can be a real challenge. And many of them do live with real fear. I know here in the Shreveport-Bossier area, I'm constantly just saddened, but also flabbergasted by the number of shootings that we have in some of our neighborhoods. Coming from the big city and the DFW Metroplex, I've often remarked that I think there's actually more, the murder rate is probably higher in Shreveport, Louisiana than it is in the huge DFW urban center. And we've had many children, unfortunately, who have been killed in drive-by shootings, family disputes, et cetera. So for them, they do live with not only poverty, but true fear for the most basic of human needs, which is safety. So when you live in those environments, it's not unusual to come to school and to be anxious, to be afraid. And so, you know, part of what successful urban schools do is they make school a haven for the children. They make it a place where no matter what, they're going to be safe, they're going to be fed, they're going to have their most basic needs met, such as, you know, we're going to have air conditioning or heat, whichever one we need. And this is going to be a place where you can actually be a child as opposed to trying to live an adult existence when you're still a child yourself. We also know too that many of our urban youth end up in the penal system. There's a lot of work being done from the cradle to the prison pipeline that looks at how our urban youth tend to be over-disciplined and penalized. One of the things that I push back on a lot when we talk about discipline, particularly for our urban students, is that discipline should be a teaching tool. It should not be centered solely on punishment. And don't get me wrong, I do believe that students need to have consequences, but they also need to learn from their experiences. So when they do something wrong or they get in trouble at school, how are we teaching them the appropriate behavior? Many of our students come to school and they don't know how to respond, to disagree respectfully. They don't know some of those school things that we expect. And so we have to spend time and energy teaching them what that looks like in a professional setting, a school setting, etc. We also know too that we really have failed in many ways when we talk about transformation because we have ignored the class distinctions. Far too often, even our teachers of color come to the school with a more middle class background than the students that they're teaching. And while that can certainly be overcome, we don't really understand the differences between, regardless of your race or the color of your skin, the distinction between middle class values and the issues that our children in poverty face. They also don't understand, like I said earlier, the day-to-day lives of our students and what it means to live in true, real fear. They also do not understand how our students are perceived as well as how our schools are perceived. And so that creates barriers and obstacles too. They often, and again, I'm stereotyping, this is not true of all teachers, but they create a context or a classroom environment that dismisses our students' lives and their very experiences. Instead of embracing those experiences and helping the students to grow and learn from them, we discount them. Maybe not even intentionally, but unfortunately we do see that happen sometimes with teachers. Teachers are also bad about, in our urban schools, using buzzwords, that maybe the students or the parents don't understand. So when we're trying to have that parent-teacher conference and we're talking about, well, the child didn't master this standard or whatever, the parent may have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. And oftentimes the parents will not speak up and ask what that means or et cetera. So we have to make sure that we're presenting information and sharing knowledge and all of those kinds of things in meaningful ways for students, their parents, and the community at large. We also know too that good intentions often lead to unintended consequences, which I just noticed was misspelled, which is going to drive me crazy. So excuse me, I have to fix that. So anyway, we have two basic ways that educators approach reforming or transforming, an urban school. And part of the problem is that when we come into those schools with one of these roles in mind, we are limiting the ability of our children to soar and to succeed. So one of them is that we come in and we have this, as a teacher or an educator, this survivor complex. And what we fail to understand is that students are going to protect themselves at all costs. So we don't understand that because they're in survival mode all the time, and they are constantly feeling that adrenaline rush that happens when we feel fearful or intimidated or anything like that, we don't understand from the student perspective what that survivor complex means. Our students will also, in urban schools particularly, do anything to avoid ridicule. Many times too, they don't know how to channel their emotions. They don't know how to appropriately let off steam or to express what they're feeling. They're often angry. But, you know, they're not going to let people know sometimes too that they're afraid or fearful. So it comes across as a bravado sort of mindset. So I remember one time when I was a middle school principal, and we were trying to gather a group of our 8th graders, and they were going on a field trip, and we're trying to get them organized to get them on the bus. And this one student kept asking me question after question after question after question, and was keeping me from helping to get the kids organized and, you know, make sure everybody's on the list, they're on the right bus with the right teacher, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And he just was like on my last nerve. And so I remember I really let it out on him. I mean, I was pretty brutal, you know, to the student. And I was so upset with myself that before they left on the field trip, I found him on the bus and I apologized to him in front of all the students and said, I was wrong. I'm really sorry that I let my frustration and anger about this situation get out of control. You know, it just was a bad moment. And, you know, a lot of people are like, well, why would you apologize? You know, that diminishes your authority as a principal and all that. I will tell you that it completely changed the way I think all of the students saw me. The fact that me as an adult was willing to stand up and say to a student, I was wrong and I'm really sorry, changed a lot of dynamics. So we have to understand too that when students strike out against us, even though it may show as bravado and they don't care or that they're angry, really deep down inside, they're acting out of fear and sadness. So the other thing that teachers tend to do is they come in and think they're going to save all these poor little children. So they will feel sorry for the student. They'll oftentimes discredit the student, not intentionally, but discredit what the student is trying to express or to feel. And that leads to that sort of ignoring of students and what they really are feeling. They see themselves as heroes, but when in reality, they're just buying into a bunch of stereotypes. And that's not what our kids need. Our kids don't need a savior. They don't need someone who is going to come in and perpetuate the survivor sort of idea. What they need is someone who is going to come in and care and love about the kid, care and love the children, but they're also going to teach them to the best of their ability, and they're going to hold them to high standards. We're not going to lower our expectations simply because our kids are coming to us from poverty. So, do you have the right stuff? Well, you know, I don't know. You know, urban school teaching is not made for everybody, but for some people, it has been like life-changing and life-affirming for them. So how do you do that? How do you make sure that you're truly in touch with your students? So we have to make sure that we understand the role physical places play in the lives of our students. So if they're, you know, 5th, 6th grade and they've had nothing but terrible experiences in school, it's very traumatizing and very challenging for them to even come to the building. You know, and they oftentimes will identify a particular location with bad memories or bad situations or whatever. So we have to make them, as I said, safety is a huge piece of this, emotional safety as well as physical safety. And while the world is out there saying race doesn't matter, we all know that it does. That people form opinions and things like that, you know, based on students because of the color of the skin or because of where they live or where they come from or who their parents are, etc. They also too will react differently. So for many of us, you know, our first reaction to violence or anything like that might be to flee, or it might be to freeze. But for the urban child, they're going to fight first. So if they're feeling threatened, their immediate response is fight. And then they'll flee, and then they'll freeze. So very different than what we're used to or what we typically do. So we have to be truly in touch with our kids and understand their reality and help give them the coping mechanisms that they're going to need to be successful both inside the classroom as well as in their community. Two different worlds. We also know that if we're really going to make a difference in our urban schools, we need new approaches to teaching and learning. You know, I was watching a video the other day from Heidi Hayes Jacobs. I love curriculum and stuff like that. And she's one of my favorite curriculum guru people. And she has a quote in there that we do a great job of getting our students ready for the world in 1991. You know, we're a good 20, 30 years behind what our kids really need. So we have to teach them differently. We also have to embrace that complexity that we have with our places and the psyche of our children. And so to do that, you really have to have a true vision of what it is that you want from your kids and what your expectations are. You know, urban kids can spot someone who's just, you know, disingenuous in a heartbeat. They can spot them a mile away. You know, so you can't fake your way through this. You've got to truly do a lot of soul searching and having those conversations with yourself about what do I really believe my kids can do and how do I get them there. We also have to know that, you know, there are huge differences between our students when they're in the classroom and who they truly are when they allow you into their emotional space. You know, it's a very different dynamic than we're probably used to, particularly those of us that have not had a lot of experience in the urban centers. You know, and we also know too that for urban youth, reality is based on the facts, the laws, and the unwritten rules from where they're from. And it's not necessarily aligned with the norms and the rules and all of those kinds of things that students are going to see when they walk into the school building. So what do we need as educators? Well, we need a new lens. We've got it, like I said earlier, we've got to really look at ourselves internally first and foremost to make sure our hearts and our you know, backpack full of strategies and understandings and all of those things are full, and that we truly are equipped to work effectively with our urban youth. We also need a new vocabulary. And by that I mean, I'm not saying that you have to, you know, speak in the lexicon or, you know, use the terms that students are using and things like that. We obviously want to model, you know, good English and those kind of things. But we do need to understand what they mean when they say a certain phrase or what that really means in reality. You know, back when I was working, you know, in the inner city schools and stuff, I became an expert at gang activity. You know, I knew what all the tags meant. I knew what all the signs meant. I knew what the colors were, what it meant if they had red shoestrings, or if they had a yellow bandana or anything like that. But for me, that was completely new learning. But it proved to be invaluable. We also have to understand too that there are two types of students oftentimes in our urban schools. There are the indigenous, I can't speak today, indigenous. Those are the students who came to the United States maybe recently. So, you know, I know in Dallas we had a lot of students that came to us from Mexico and Guatemala and South America, et cetera. And they remember their home country and all of that. But then, and you know, oftentimes there's a difference in the way those students are going to approach school and the way their parents view school than some of our students who are what I would call the neo-indigenous. So what I mean by that is sometimes by the time you get immigrant children who are in the second or third generation, their mindset about school is very different than the students who are brand new to the country. So for example, I remember vividly, we got a little girl in one of our elementary schools. She was from Kosovo. And this is during the time when, you know, Kosovo was a very war-torn country. It was really horrific what was happening. And her first day of school, I just happened to be there, and I was talking to the principal, and as she was walking out, her dad was there to meet her. And the principal asked her, "How did your first day go?" And she said, without batting an eye, she said, "There were no bombings. I didn't hear any bombs today go off." And it just like cut me to the core. I thought, what child should be thankful that they're not hearing bombs going off every day? So for her to be in a safe environment, to know that that wasn't happening all the time around her, she viewed school very differently than some of our students who, like I said, are second and third generation and you know, maybe take school for granted or don't really see the value in it. So we have to understand that, those differences. We also have to know the difference between a physical wound and a soul wound. So physical wounds are obviously, you know, pretty easy. You know, unfortunately, many of our kids suffer abuse and, you know, have the trauma of, you know, sexual abuse, child abuse, neglect, those kind of things. But what's harder to see and to address are oftentimes those soul wounds, those things that have hurt the child's inner core. And the way that we respond and support them is really important. So we also need to remember too that soul wounds are bigger than our physical wounds or even the issues themselves. And it takes a lot of time to heal those. And there has to be consistency of love and support many times to get our kids over the hump with that. So healing a wound, what is our reality? So in the environment, we need to make sure that our school experiences are visible and create those contexts for students to thrive. So, you know, oftentimes we have to scaffold or enrich the kinds of experiences that we expect our students to be a part of. I think I told you guys that, you know, here we lived and, you know, here I was, you know, working in a school that sat in, you know, one of the really rough neighborhoods very close to downtown Dallas. And I was just flabbergasted when I realized students had never been 10 miles to the north and never seen the Galleria Mall or didn't know what an ice skating rink looked like. So we realized very quickly that we had to fill in a lot of experiences that our kids had never had. They'd never been to the zoo. They'd never done some of these things. They didn't know what it meant to go to a museum and how that behavior is. And so we spent a lot of time after school weekends, field trips, experiences, camps, things like that. We also have to trust the kids. You know, when we ask our kids, you know, how do you learn best? They usually know, and they're going to tell us, and we have to pay attention to that. So instead of teaching the way we're most comfortable, we have to adapt our teaching to meet the needs of the students and how they're going to learn best. We also need to let our students be involved in how they construct that classroom space. So for example, you know, we oftentimes did classroom contracts where, you know, here's our classroom constitution and here's the things we're going to do. That was completely made by my students. And, you know, it was pretty amazing what they came up with, you know, and so things that, you know, like that we're not going to get mad if someone borrows my pencil. I would have never thought that needed to be part of a classroom constitution, but my kids, because their possessions were so valuable to them because they had such a lack of them, those things became really important. So it's important that we listen more to our kids and talk a whole lot less at them, which we do. We also need to remember too that their perception is their reality. And even though that may fly in the face of facts, because they perceive it that way, for them that is their reality. And we have to honor and understand it. So we also have to see, you know, our students, we have to quit seeing them as poor. We have to get to know our students as individuals and making sure that we teach them as individuals and provide that scaffolded support and learning that's going to help them and meet them where they are. You know, so because there are a lot of cultural differences, it can make it difficult for teachers and students. But when we go into the classroom with the right mindset and we spend that time, particularly at the beginning of a school year, getting to know our students and seeing where maybe the practices that we have are misaligned with the needs of the students, and we can correct that. So there is a lot of hope for our students who oftentimes feel invisible, unloved, uncared about, you know, in our systems. So, the truth of urban education reform. There is hope. There's lots of hope. But it's not about programs, guys. There's no program out there you can go purchase and it's going to solve all the problems. And while planning is important, it's not the be-all, end-all either. It's not even about the way you organize your school. You know, I've seen tons of people pour money. Bill Gates Foundation was one of them. They put a ton of money into the smaller learning communities, concept and ideas. You know, the core, what's it called? I'm sorry, I just went totally blank. You know, the core curriculum and all of that kind of stuff. And they were shocked when, you know, suddenly, you know, they expected suddenly for urban schools to perform like, you know, their more affluent counterparts, and it didn't happen. Because what they forgot to address is the most important piece in a school. It is the teacher. It's the teacher's attitude. It's the teacher's heart. It's the teacher's skill set. It's the teacher's ability to listen and connect with their students. And it's the teacher's ability to make a safe environment for students emotionally, physically, and every other way. When you have all of those things come together and you provide the kind of support students need, and most importantly, teachers need, that's when we begin to see real reform happen. So I'm going to stop sharing here for a minute. So just in conclusion, I just want to remind us all, sometimes I get really down and depressed, honestly, when I think about the challenges our urban schools and our students face, because sometimes it seems insurmountable, particularly right now with everything that's going on in COVID, and we keep going back to virtual schools. And obviously I'm teaching an online class. It's not that I'm opposed to virtual learning, but the reality is for our children of poverty, there is still a huge digital divide, and they don't have access to the internet, to a computer, to a webcam, to all of these tools that they need. And so while we're doing virtual learning because of the COVID virus, and like I said, I'm not going to get into the politics, that's irrelevant at this point. What's happening to our children, particularly our poorest children, is a travesty. Our kids need teachers, and they need teachers right there with them to the extent possible, because otherwise our students who have the most need are going to fall further and further behind. So I want you to think about and, just kind of wrestle with the idea. I don't have a magic bullet. I don't have the answers, but I really worry when we do get back to normal, whatever the new normal looks like for all of us and for our students. Our kids, particularly in our urban schools, are going to be so much further behind than they would have been normally. So we're going to have to really put forth our very best efforts to ensure that there is equity as well as excellence for every single student in our schools. And the only thing that keeps me from crying about it all the time is the fact that I know how many amazing and dedicated teachers, as well as school leaders that are out there that are truly committed to making a difference in the lives of our kids. So remember, our children shouldn't be invisible. They're right here in front of us, and they need us more than ever. Thanks, guys. I hope you enjoyed the presentation tonight, and we'll talk about it a little bit more the next time we get together. Remember, it is Thanksgiving week, so if you have the week off, lucky you, I'm jealous. But also remember too, we won't have a Zoom meeting this week. Our next Zoom meeting will be the week after Thanksgiving on Wednesday. I believe it's December the 2nd. So thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'll talk with you soon. Thanks.